Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Story 1, The Judge's Secret. I was 17 in the summer of 1978, the kind of Kentucky summer that makes the road shimmer and cicadas sound like a power line. My world was simple: church on Sundays, homework at the kitchen table, and a part-time job at Murphy's Hardware where I stenciled prices on paint cans and breathed in the sweet chemical fog of turpentine. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone also knew where not to look. His name was Tate Braxton, and he was everything I wasn't: reckless, sunburned, and sure of himself. His father was Judge Marshall Braxton, a man whose photograph hung in the courthouse lobby with a bronze plate under it and a row of flags that never quite hung straight. When the judge entered a room, voices dipped. When he left, they dipped lower, as if silence itself were standing at attention. Tate had that easy kind of smile people confuse with goodness. He'd flip a quarter, catch it on his knuckles, lean across the counter, and say my name as if it were a secret only he'd learned to pronounce. We met at the county fair behind the cattle barn, where the light bulbs hummed and the air smelled like sawdust and frying oil. He asked if I wanted a lemonade. I said yes. That is how a life turns on something as small as a paper cup gone warm in your hand. By October, I knew I was pregnant. I took a bus 2 towns over to buy a drugstore test and read the instructions 3 times in the public library bathroom, as if the words could rearrange themselves into a different outcome. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I remember thinking not about the future, but about the clock on the wall and how loud it had become. Each second, a metal door slamming shut. I told Tate first. He sat on the hood of his father's Ford and bit the inside of his cheek until it bled. "I'll handle it," he said at last, not looking at me, as if the problem were a stray dog skulking behind the courthouse. 2 evenings later, a car I didn't recognize pulled up in front of our house. I watched from the window as a woman in a navy skirt suit stepped out. She introduced herself to my parents as Mrs. Carter from Youth Services. She had the kind of face that looked like it had been ironed. While she spoke, my father kept nodding as if he were listening to a sermon he didn't quite agree with. I heard the words through the hallway: fragile, rest, temporary, for her own good. That night, my mother folded 3 dresses into a suitcase and cried into one of them when she thought I wasn't looking. There were no discussions, just instructions. A place called St. Bridget's Retreat where I could recover from strain. The next morning, I was in the back seat of Mrs. Carter's sedan watching our town shrink in the rearview mirror. We didn't take the highway. We took back roads that stitched through tobacco fields and decaying barns. It felt like being erased in slow motion. St. Bridget's wasn't a convent and it wasn't a hospital. It was a shuttered Victorian house with a sagging porch and a sign out front that said "No visitors after 6." Inside, everything smelled like boiled cabbage and lemon cleaner. The rules were posted above a metal desk: no phone calls, no mail without review, no leaving the grounds unescorted. They took my shoelaces and gave me slippers that made no sound when I walked. The other girls spoke in the code of people who had learned silence as a survival skill. A nurse named Ida handed out vitamins that were not vitamins. They made you lightheaded, unmoored, agreeable. The matron, Sister Evelyn, wore no habit, only a starched blouse and a cross that flashed when she turned her head. She called us guests. I learned very quickly that a guest is someone whose welcome can be revoked. At night, the old house groaned and shifted like a ship at sea. Ida made her rounds with a ring of keys that sounded like tiny bells. In the common room, a cracked phonograph played hymns at the wrong speed. We were allowed outside for exactly 30 minutes after lunch to walk a rectangle of lawn bordered by hedges trimmed into obedience. Beyond the hedges, a two-lane road flowed past as if it were a river and we were stones at the bottom. No one mentioned the fathers of our babies. No one mentioned us. 3 weeks in, I saw Judge Braxton on the porch with Sister Evelyn. He didn't enter the house. He stood in the shadow, speaking without moving his lips much, as if even his words had to be controlled. Sister Evelyn nodded and nodded, clutching a ledger with both hands. I remember the way the sunlight hit the judge's ring and threw a hard, bright line across the steps. That night, Ida brought me tea that tasted like chalk and told me I needed rest. "Important people are helping," she said. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Important people. I learned the word placement. I learned that a newborn could be a case. I learned that paperwork could turn a person into a line item that moved from one column to another if the math suited those holding the pencil. I wasn't brave, but fear, when it is cornered, becomes resourceful, so I counted. I counted the keys on Ida's ring. I counted the steps between my room and the office. I counted how long the night nurse disappeared into the pantry at the end of the hall to smoke a cigarette she thought no one smelled. I counted the ways out and the ways in, and which ones were watched by the cracked glass of old windows and which weren't. There was a locked cabinet in the office that held files with case numbers on their spines. On the fourth Thursday, during the hymn at the wrong speed, I slipped behind the desk while Sister Evelyn led the girls in prayer and Ida stood at the door counting heads. The cabinet was old. It yielded to a butter knife. Inside, I found a ledger with names, dates, amounts, and a column labeled simply donors. Our first names were replaced with Rose, Dawn, Lily. The babies were A12, B7, C19. Donations were written in round, careful script. $400 for linens, $1, $200 for renovations, $1 for discretion. One entry had my due date. Another had Tate's initials, then crossed out, replaced by M. Braxton. On the receipts, the signature was quick, impatient, practiced. Underneath the ledger sat a stack of pre-signed affidavits declaring that the mothers were unfit and the children surrendered freely. The top sheet was blank except for a space where my name would go. The pen waiting on the blotter was blue. The blotter itself was stained the color of old cherries. I didn't have a plan, not really. What I had was a promise I'd made to the life inside me at 2 in the morning, when the house was quiet enough to hear its own pulse. I whispered that I would not let us vanish into someone else's paperwork. The storm came and brought with it chance, the kind of rain that turns roads to soup and makes electricity into a rumor. The lights flickered and went out. Ida fumbled with her keys. Sister Evelyn cursed softly as she lit a candle. The phonograph died mid-hymn. The hedge outside blew as if it were trying to uproot itself and run. I took my shoelaces back from the matron's closet and tied the window latch open in the bathroom. The hedge scratched the siding like a warning. Rain blew in sideways. I slid out onto the porch roof, inching past the downspout, the slate slick under my palms. Somewhere in the house, a door banged. And somewhere else Ida called my name as if saying it could make me obedient again. I dropped into mud and ran. The road was a ribbon of water. I ran with both hands on my belly as if carrying something breakable in a storm, which I was. I don't remember the first miles. I remember a gas station glow across the rain, a payphone with a receiver sticky from too many hands, and a man behind the counter who looked at me and said nothing, then slid me 3/4 and turned away as if he hadn't. I dialed the only number I could recite in my sleep, Ellie's, my best friend since kindergarten. When she answered, I didn't give her time to be shocked. "Please come," I said. "Please don't tell anyone." She came in her brother's tan Nova with a towel and a thermos and a pair of shoes that didn't fit. We didn't go home. Home was a place where the phone would ring and ring, and my parents would be told I was safe at St. Bridget's, and the ledger would be signed regardless. We drove to Louisville, to a small church basement shelter Ellie's aunt had whispered about once over dishwater, the Larkspur house. It wasn't much, but the door had a chain on the inside, and the women there spoke to me like I was a person and not a file. I had my daughter on a Tuesday as the sun came up hard and indifferent. She came with a full head of dark hair and a cry like a siren. I named her Grace because I would need it and because she already had it. I wish I could tell you that the story ended there, with tenderness and a tired mother and a new start. But small towns do not let you go so easily, not when you've brushed against someone who believes laws are tools for polishing their own reflection. 2 weeks after Grace was born, a letter arrived at the shelter addressed to me in a steady man's hand. There was no return address. Inside, a single typed page. "We regret to inform you that you have been identified as an at-risk minor." Under KRS, it began, and then dove into an ocean of statute numbers and orders for temporary custody. At the bottom, Judge M. Braxton. The next page was a warrant for my transport back to appropriate care. There was a third item, a copy of the affidavit with my name typed in blue where the blank had been in Sister Evelyn's office. I walked outside and sat on the church steps with the paper in my lap as if sunshine could bleach its words. I thought about the ledger. I thought about Ida's pocket of keys. I thought about the look on Tate's face when he said, "I'll handle it," not as an offer but as a declaration. I did something I had never done. I called a reporter. You wouldn't have liked Mary Ellen Reeves if you had to share a church pew with her, but she is exactly the person you want on your side when something is both wrong and hidden. She had a beak of a nose and a way of listening that made people confess to things by accident. I told her everything, including the parts that made me look like a fool. She didn't blink. She said, "You'll keep the originals with you, and I'll take copies," as if we were talking about recipes. She went to the courthouse. She went to St. Bridget's. She went to a social worker in another county who owed her a favor. On the third day, she returned with a photograph from the state archives, a ribbon cutting for a maternal rest home, with the judge's hand on the giant scissors and Sister Evelyn standing behind him, blurry but unmistakable. The caption named donors. The largest was the Braxton Community Foundation. "Do you want to do this?" Mary Ellen asked. "If we print, your name will be in it. There will be noise." Grace slept in the crook of my arm with her mouth open like a little bird. Noise had already found us. "Print," I said. The article ran on a Sunday. The headline was "Quiet Rooms, Loud Money." Under it, a column of numbers and a photograph of a ledger line with my due date blacked out but still obvious in context. The story did what stories do when they are true and unwanted. It spread. It hit radio, then the state paper, then out of state. Letters poured in, some hopeful, some cruel. The judge called the story slander. The matron called it misunderstood charity. Tate called me once from a number I didn't recognize and said, "You've made this ugly." I hung up. The Attorney General's office announced a review. I can't tell you whether they meant it. I can tell you that a month later the retreat closed without ceremony. Trucks came at night. A for sale sign appeared on a Monday. By Friday it had been ripped out of the ground. We moved. I changed my last name. I worked 2 jobs and kept every receipt in a shoebox as if the shoebox were armor. Life became laundry and pancakes and pediatrician appointments and worry that felt like air. I learned to walk past newsstands. I startled at the sound of a hammer on a nail because somewhere in my head it became a gavel. Years turned like the pages of a ledger but without the columns. Grace grew. She asked once why her middle name was Ellen. And I told her, and she said she wanted to meet Mary Ellen someday. And I said she would, and then the phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. And for a moment the room tilted back to 1978. It was Ida. Her voice was smaller than I remembered, like a radio turned down. She said she was in hospice and had been talking to God more than usual. She wanted to see me. I did not want to see her. I went anyway, not because I am good, but because I wanted to look at the face that had stood at the door counting heads while a ledger counted dollars. She told me what I knew and what I hadn't. That St. Bridget's had started as a refuge and become a warehouse. That the donor column had grown fatter as the mother's column became more anonymous. That Judge Braxton had never stepped inside the dormitory, not once, but his voice had, on the phone, in orders, in threats disguised as offers. She cried and said she had saved some things when the trucks came. She pointed to a cardboard box on the chair. Inside were photocopies, ledgers, affidavits, thank you notes written on thick paper from people with lake houses. There was also a Polaroid of the ribbon cutting that the state archives had not cataloged. In it, Tate stood behind his father, half smiling at something off camera, his hair bright in the sun. Why? I asked, and I didn't mean why she saved the papers. I meant why people who already have everything must own what isn't theirs. Ida didn't answer. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she thought she did once and then forgot. 2 years later, Judge Braxton died. The town grieved like a family that owes the patriarch their mortgage. The paper printed a full page with a list of his accomplishments and a photograph of him as a young man in uniform. There was no mention of St. Bridget's. There was certainly no mention of the ledger. I kept clipping the obituaries to see if a window would open where truth could slip in. It didn't. That should be the end. The judge is gone. The house is sold. And the girls who used to walk a square of lawn are women now with jobs and small kitchens and memories that don't let them sleep. But stories like this live in basements and boxes, and the way people look away when a particular name is spoken. They live in donation plaques with dates chiseled off, and portraits with brass plates that shine brighter the more they are polished. Grace turned 19 and asked to see the town where I grew up. I told her yes. I told myself I would not narrate every street corner, that I would not turn memory into a guided tour of harm. We drove in on a Wednesday under a sky so blue it felt staged. The hardware store was a nail salon. The courthouse had a new ramp but the same steps. The judge's portrait still hung in the lobby, softer now, as if varnish had bloomed into fog. We didn't go to St. Bridget's. There was nowhere to go. A developer had flattened the house and put up townhomes with names like Maple Row that sounded like apologies. But I wanted to put my hand on something, any original brick that hadn't been sold off. We walked the perimeter of the complex until we reached a retaining wall at the very back where the land dropped off toward the trees. Someone had spray painted a line there, a thin black line at knee height that meant nothing. Above it, you could make out the ghost of an older paint, numbers, maybe, or letters washed by rain. Grace crouched and traced them with her finger. I looked closer. They weren't letters. They were hash marks, sets of 5, scratched into the wall when it had been foundation. Little prisons carved by a small, sharp thing. Counting. Later in the motel, Grace slept and I stared at the ceiling tile until it became a map. I thought about the counting I had done. I thought about the ledger columns. I thought about how we measure time with calendars and court terms and due dates, and how none of those units can measure the miles a person travels in a single night during a storm. The next morning, we drove to Mary Ellen's retirement place with a grocery bag of cinnamon rolls. She laughed at my city hair and told Grace her middle name was the only good decision I'd ever made that she approved of in advance. We sat with our styrofoam cups and watched a robin yank a worm from a lawn that had been fought over by committees. Mary Ellen said, "Do you know why your mother kept every receipt?" Grace shrugged. Mary Ellen said, "Because paper is how they tried to take her away. Paper is how she proved she existed." We were heading to the car when a woman in a maintenance uniform called my name. She looked about my age, maybe older, hard to tell with the sun in my eyes. She said she'd recognized me from an old clipping the day the article ran. "I was a 7, she said, and then looked at Grace and smiled in a way that felt like a hand on a shoulder. "They named me April where I went," she added, "but I never liked it." We stood in the parking lot as traffic hissed on the wet road and told one another true things. She had a daughter. I had a daughter. We had both moved more times than we meant to. She had kept a ribbon. I had kept a ledger copy. We hugged like people who survived a building that others say was never on fire. On the drive home, Grace dozed with her cheek against the window, and I let the radio murmur nonsense. The town shrank in the mirror the way it had once grown smaller behind a navy skirt suit. Roads stitched us back toward the life we'd made without permission slips or donations. I watched the trees flash past in long green commas and thought of what I would say if I ever spoke to Tate again. It wasn't an argument. It was a sentence. I did not vanish. I won't pretend there's justice here that fits in a final paragraph. The ledger didn't send anyone to prison. The retreat didn't reopen as something good. People who knew better stayed quiet long enough to retire. What exists is record, and the refusal to let someone else write you into a margin. What exists is a daughter with a name we chose, and a laugh that sounds like summer, and a wall at the back of a townhouse complex where someone once scratched lines into wet cement and counted days until a storm gave them one. If you grew up in a small town, you learn early that secrets aren't buried. They're filed. They're tax deductible. They hang in the lobby with a brass plate and a list of donors. And sometimes, if you catch the light just right, you can see the fingerprints on the glass where somebody tried to wipe away the summary of what they did. I still have the butter knife that opened the cabinet. It sits in the back of my kitchen drawer under rubber bands and a broken pencil sharpener. When I reach past it for something else, my fingers bump the dull edge and remind me of two truths. What is locked can open, and what is written can be read. And if you're listening to this because you've felt the quiet pressure of a town that insists on its innocence, keep your papers, keep your promises, count the keys. When the storm comes, tie open the latch and go. Story 2, The Crosses in the Woods. If you've ever walked off-trail in a small town forest and felt like the trees were watching you, You might want to hear this story, because what started as a carefree hike for four friends turned into months of silent stalking, messages in the night, and a reminder that some places are marked with warnings for a reason. This isn't a campfire tale. This is a true account, retold with changed names and details, but the fear behind it, that part is real. It was late summer in Mississippi, the kind of heat that soaks through your shirt and makes the ground smell of pine sap and clay. Four college friends, let's call them Alex, Rachel, Jordan, and Will, decided to spend their Saturday hiking. They weren't thrill seekers. No one brought ghost hunting gear or Ouija boards. They just wanted a break from the grind of work and study. They packed sandwiches, cameras, and water bottles. No one thought to bring protection because who brings that on a day hike near home? At first, it was nothing unusual. Cicadas buzzing dusty trails, the occasional deer darting across the underbrush. But after a couple hours, the marked trail ended. Instead of turning back, they wandered deeper, hoping to find a shortcut that circled back. That's when they noticed the first sign. At first glance, it looked like folk art, an animal skull nailed to a tree, jaw hanging open. Rachel joked it was just hunters being weird. But then further in came more signs. Wooden crosses shoved into the earth at crooked angles. Cloth strips tied to branches, fluttering in the breeze like faded prayer flags. Charred candles half buried in dirt. And strangest of all, dolls made from sticks and twine, some missing limbs, some with faces burned away. The deeper they went, the more it felt arranged, not random litter, but a pattern. Alex, always the joker, snapped photos, grinning like he'd stumbled into free content for Reddit. The others laughed nervously, but none of them said what they were all thinking. This wasn't meant to be seen. At the center of it all stood a massive oak tree blackened by age, with carvings gouged into its bark, spirals, runes, and bones hammered into the trunk like trophies. Jordan broke the silence first. "We should go, now." They agreed. No one argued. That night, back at home, Alex uploaded 3 of the photos. Nothing with faces, nothing that revealed location. Just crosses, the skull, and one of the dolls. Within hours, his phone buzzed. 1:07 a.m. A message from an unknown number. No text, just a photo. It was his driveway. The picture had been taken minutes earlier. He ran to the window, nothing but darkness. No cars, no footsteps, just silence pressing against the glass. He didn't sleep. By morning, the others had their own stories. Jordan's phone buzzed at 2:00 a.m. with a blank message, just static like a broken signal. Rachel found her back door open, even though she swore she'd locked it. Will heard tapping on his bedroom window at 3:00 a.m., but when he looked, there was only a crude wooden cross leaning against the sill. At first, they thought maybe someone was pranking them. But how? They hadn't shared their location with anyone. Within days, the intrusions escalated. Alex's security camera caught a hooded figure standing on his porch for 5 minutes straight, never knocking, never moving, just staring. Rachel's cat disappeared. She later found a collar nailed to her fence with feathers tied around it. Will woke up to find the word "return" scrawled in mud across his windshield. The police were no help. Reports were filed, but with no evidence beyond grainy footage and anonymous texts, nothing stuck. Probably kids messing around, one officer shrugged. But deep down, the 4 friends knew this wasn't random. It was connected to what they'd seen in the woods. By week 3, their lives unraveled. Rachel stopped going hiking altogether. She wouldn't even step outside at night. Jordan moved states, too shaken to stay. Will deleted all his social media, convinced the photos had cursed them. Alex, though, couldn't let go. He dug deeper. He started researching local history, old town records, and folklore. That's when he found something. A news clipping from the 1950. Local family accused of backwoods rituals, case dismissed. The article mentioned a grove east of town where crosses and bones were discovered by hunters. The family denied involvement, but soon after they vanished, moved away, or disappeared entirely. No one followed up, but the location matched the woods. The crosses weren't just decoration. They were a boundary, a warning. Alex called the others. He wanted to go back, to see if the grove had changed, if something was hidden there. Only Will agreed. The two drove out at dusk, parking on the gravel road. The forest looked normal at first, but the deeper they walked, the colder the air grew, as if summer itself had been drained from the soil. When they reached the oak, everything had changed. The crosses were gone. The dolls, the bones, all vanished. In their place was something worse, freshly dug earth, a shallow pit wide enough for two. Behind them, branches cracked. Not one person, but many. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling. Alex raised his phone light, but it barely pierced the dark, just shadows moving. They didn't wait, they ran. By the time they reached the car, both were shaking, lungs burning. Alex turned the key and the headlights caught something at the edge of the road, a figure, hooded, holding one of Alex's printed photos from his upload. The paper fluttered in the wind. They drove without looking back. Weeks later, Alex deleted his accounts, his photos, everything. Will moved in with family out of state. Jordan and Rachel cut off contact entirely. The texts stopped. The visits ended, but the silence didn't feel like relief. It felt like a deal, like the woods had accepted something in exchange for leaving them alone. Alex never hiked again. Will still wakes up at 3:00 a.m. hearing tapping on glass. Rachel avoids forests entirely, and Jordan refuses to even say the word crosses. To this day, the grove has no marker on any map, no official record. But ask the locals and some will whisper the same phrase. Some places are marked for a reason. Don't touch what's meant to stay buried. Story 3, the Halloween game. Halloween is supposed to be fun. Costumes, candy, a harmless prank or two. But in one small Midwestern town, two brothers learned the hard way that sometimes the person you're teasing isn't just some grumpy old neighbor, sometimes he's been waiting for you. And what they discovered one October night still haunts them to this day. Every small town has that house. You know the one, the sagging porch, the weeds growing tall, the man inside who never waves and never hands out candy. For the Whitman brothers, Eddie, age 15, and Mark, age 13, that house belonged to Mr. Delvin. Delvin was in his 70s, a retired machinist with cloudy glasses and a permanent scowl. He lived alone at the edge of town in a red brick house that faced the cornfields. Kids whispered rumors about him, that he kept jars of animal hearts, that he'd once been in prison, that his basement door was chained from the outside. Every Halloween, Eddie and Mark made Delvin their target. One year, they scattered toilet paper across his porch. Another year, they left a fake bloody hand in his mailbox. The year after, they hid in the bushes with a speaker that played screams when he stepped outside. Delvin never called the police. He never told their parents. He'd just come storming out, flashlight shaking in his fist, croaking threats into the night before retreating back inside. To the brothers, it was a tradition, a harmless rivalry, but they never stopped to wonder why Delvin never fought back. Halloween of 1996 was warmer than usual, the kind of night where the air felt heavy and restless. Eddie was a sophomore now, taller and braver, and he'd planned the ultimate scare for Delvin. He brought along a plastic baby doll, its face painted with fake blood, and a set of smoke bombs he'd swiped from a friend. The plan, sneak onto Delvin's property after dark, set the doll on his porch, light the smoke bombs, and watch him freak out. Mark was nervous. What if he's waiting this time? He whispered as they crept down the dirt road. Eddie laughed. He's too old to catch us. Don't chicken out. When they reached the property, something was immediately wrong. For the first time ever, Delvin's house was decorated. Paper skeletons taped to the windows. An inflatable pumpkin glowing faintly on the lawn. Orange lights strung across the porch railing. It looked normal, almost cheerful. The brothers froze. In all their years of torment, Delvin had never once celebrated Halloween. Why now? Eddie grinned. He's trying to play along, makes it even better. But Mark's gut twisted. It felt like bait. The yard was too quiet. No TV sounds, no radio static. Delvin was known for blasting old talk shows late into the night. Tonight, nothing. Eddie handed Mark the smoke bombs and crept toward the shed near the back fence. Set these up by the porch, he whispered. I'll rig something by the shed, double the scare. Mark didn't like it. He hated splitting up, but Eddie was always in charge. So he crouched by the porch, fumbling with the smoke bombs while keeping one eye on the dark windows. That's when he heard it, the creak of the shed door swinging open, a loud clang, metal slamming shut, then silence. Eddie, Mark hissed. No answer. Mark tiptoed toward the shed. The padlock on the door, which had always been rusted shut, was now snapped closed, fresh and shiny. But when he leaned close, he thought he heard something inside. A muffled sound like fabric scraping or someone shifting in the dark. He backed away, heart pounding. That's when he noticed the small trail camera mounted above the shed, its red light blinking. Directly beneath it was a cardboard sign nailed to the wood. Tricked. Mark's blood ran cold. This wasn't their prank anymore. This was Delvin's. Panic gave Mark courage. He darted to the house, hoping to find Eddie, praying it was a joke. The front door was locked tight, but a basement window on the side had rotting wood around the frame. With shaking hands, he pried it open and slipped inside. The basement smelled of mildew, dust, and something metallic. Old tools were piled in the corners. Masks and Halloween props, cheap plastic fangs, rubber bats, fake severed arms, were scattered across shelves like a party supply store gone wrong. He crept upstairs into the kitchen. No lights, but on the table sat a flashlight, still warm as if someone had just put it down. Eddie, he whispered. Silence. Mark grabbed the flashlight and bolted back outside. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped it as he jammed Eddie's screwdriver into the shed hinge bolts. Finally, with a groan of metal, the door cracked open. Inside, Eddie was crouched on the floor, pale, wrists bound with duct tape. He looked up with wild eyes. Mark, look at the walls, he whispered hoarsely. Mark raised the flashlight. The shed walls were plastered with photographs. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Yellowed Polaroids, black and white prints, glossy 4x6s. All of them were of the brothers, Halloween after Halloween, year after year. Eddie tossing toilet paper. Mark sneaking with a rubber snake. Both of them laughing under streetlights. Even pictures taken through their bedroom windows. Some were circled in red marker. Some had dates scrawled in shaky handwriting. At the very top of the wall was a heading written in thick black ink. Payback. Mark ripped the tape off Eddie's wrists, and together they bolted, leaving the shed door hanging open. They didn't stop running until they reached the safety of Main Street. gasping under the flickering glow of the lamppost. Neither of them spoke about it that night. The next morning, Eddie swore he'd seen someone Delvin, or maybe someone else, watching from the trees as they fled. But when they returned with their parents, the shed was empty. No photos, no sign of locks, no cameras, no sign at all that anything had happened. Just an old, dusty shed full of lawn tools. Delvin stood on his porch, sipping coffee, and smiled faintly as if he'd been waiting for them. The brothers never pranked Delvin again, but every Halloween after, Delvin's house was always decorated. Same paper skeletons, same inflatable pumpkin, same cheap orange lights. Not for the holiday, for a reminder, a silent message: I'm still watching. Years later, when Mark drove back through town as an adult, he slowed past that same brick house. The decorations were still there, weathered and sagging. The porch light flickered on as if triggered by his car. And for just a second, he swore he saw a shadow in the window holding something that glinted like a camera lens. So tell me, was Mr. Delvin just an eccentric old man defending himself from pranksters, or was he something far darker? One thing's certain: if you're planning a Halloween prank this year, think twice about whose house you target. You never know who's been waiting for you and for how long. Story 4: The Girl Who Knew Where I Lived. If you think the past stays in yearbooks and shoeboxes, you've never lived in a town small enough for one stoplight and a single AM radio station. This is about the year my old middle school almost girlfriend came back like a ghost that knew my schedule, my friends, my windows, and then vanished so cleanly it felt like a door closing underwater. I'm Evan, and I grew up in Grantham, Indiana, a place where people measure distance in church parking lots and fairgrounds. By senior year, I had finally carved out something like a normal life. A job at Tierney's Hardware, varsity benchwarmer, and a new girlfriend named Kayla who liked thunder and sang off-key in the car. We weren't dramatic, we were quiet, which is exactly the kind of life that can be ruined by attention. The attention arrived as a message from a name I hadn't seen since middle school: Leela Hart. Back then, Leela and I were 7th grade official for exactly 3 weeks and 2 days, hand-holding during lunch, text messages about stray dogs and history homework. A date to the fall carnival where I won a goldfish neither of us could keep. Then her family moved to a town 30 miles away. We fizzled out like most middle school things do. I put the goldfish in my uncle's pond and didn't think of her for years. And then I did, because she was suddenly there again on my phone in my feed, stitched right through the life I'd built without her. Her first DM was simple: Leela, saw your post about the bonfire. I missed that field. How are you, Evan? Polite, normal, like we were catching up at a grocery store. I answered cautious because Kayla was real and present, not a memory. I told Leela I was seeing someone, that I hoped she was doing well. Leela sent back a hearts emoji and happy for you, then asked about the old middle school crowd. That would have been the end of it if her messages had stayed daylight-sized, but they got longer and later. Paragraphs arrived at 1:37 a.m., 2:11 a.m., 3:04 a.m., times that felt like someone had been waiting to catch me off guard. At first, I didn't answer. When I did, I set boundaries. Me: hey, I'm with Kayla now. Please keep things chill and during the day. Leela: totally. So happy for you too. You look content. Me: thanks. Leela: I miss how we used to talk. I keep thinking about your hands at the carnival. Do you remember how I knew you were behind me without turning around? I didn't answer that one. The next afternoon, Kayla and I went to Nora's diner for grilled cheese and the kind of bottomless coffee that stains your teeth. Leela was there alone in a corner booth, not eating, not scrolling, just watching. She lifted 2 fingers in a small hello that felt like a test. We left early. Kayla tried to laugh it off, but you can't laugh through a second pair of eyes. That night, the first burner account messaged Kayla. He'll leave you for someone who knew him before you did. No photo, no name, just a blank circle where a face should be. Kayla blocked it and curled into me on the couch, pretending she wasn't shaking. I said it would stop if we ignored it. I said people get weird online. I said the things you say when you hope being reasonable can beat whatever is not. The fake accounts multiplied. The messages changed tone, not threats, explanations, stories about me that were mostly true and therefore harder to swat down. He cried when his dog died and hid in his truck for an hour. He only joined cross country because he thought Coach would like him more if he ran. Ask him about the yearbook note he tore out and kept. Some of it dug into places I'd never posted. Old texts, photographs from a lost phone, a shaky video of me in 7th grade trying to ollie off the library curb, scraped knees visible through ripped jeans, my voice a smaller echo of the one I use now. I called Leela from a number she didn't have and told her to stop. She said, "You're imagining things." She said, "I've grown up." She said, "I'm engaged, actually." And then the part that slipped under my skin and lived there. I kept what you threw away. In a small town, reputation spreads like fire over dry stubble. The burner account sent photos to group chats. Nothing explicit, just dumb, tender things you never expect to see again. Me in a homemade superhero cape, me holding a letter with her name on it, me asleep in the back of a bus with my mouth open. Edited to look recent, cropped tight to cut out the past and pasted on the present. My dad said, "Girls get emotional." My mom said, "Block her and be done." The school counselor said, "Off campus. Not our jurisdiction." Deputy Malloy leaned on the counter at Tierney's and told me to get some sleep, kid. Everyone had advice sized to their comfort. 2 weeks in, I started parking on the street instead of my driveway, in case someone with a camera preferred a clean shot. I started sleeping in bursts. I stopped posting, and the silence made me more visible, not less. Anyone who has lived through this knows, absence on the internet is an event. The car appeared on a Thursday. Old tan Buick LeSabre, window cracked even in the cold, a blue glass heart swinging from the rear view like a metronome. I saw it from the kitchen window while I stacked plates beside the sink. The Buick idled across from the house with its lights off. When I stepped onto the porch, it rolled forward without rushing, tires whispering on the road as if it had other places to be. Kayla asked me not to tell her if it came back. I promised. I lied. It came back on Sunday, then Tuesday, then Friday. It always idled for a while and left before I could frame it in my phone. The tapping started after that, once on the kitchen window, twice on the bedroom glass, soft as a question. I kept the lights off and watched the dark until it thinned with dawn. The next day, someone left a wind chime on our porch, 5 keys tied to fishing line clacking together when the air moved. One was cut in the shape of a house. On its face in red Sharpie, a single word, soon. Kayla took it down with tongs like it was hot. We didn't hang anything else there for months. Small town life continued because that is what it does. I stocked screws by thread size and pretended the aisles of Tierney's were a cathedral where quietness could absolve me. Leela posted a picture of a ring on a hand I didn't recognize. The caption read, "Found home." Comments from cousins and co-workers poured in. I stopped reading. That week, someone started calling. Not Leela's number. Not a number at all, just unknown caller with a voice that might have been a person, might have been a recording. Never words. Breathing. Sometimes too even, like someone trying to practice being calm. I bought a small trail camera because it seemed like the thing you do when people keep insisting proof is the difference between fear and drama. I hid it in the lilac bush that separates our yard from the Fletchers. I told Kayla it was for raccoons. The first 2 nights, nothing but grainy raccoon faces. On the third, 2:42 a.m., the camera caught the edge of a figure moving along the street toward our house. Not close enough to identify. Hooded, holding their phone at chest level, screen angled up as if filming the sky. It made no sense until I realized the glow on their face came from our upstairs window. I called Deputy Malloy again. He watched the clip while pretending not to be bored. Hard to tell, he said. Could be a jogger. At 2:42 in the morning, wearing a hood, filming my house. Get better lighting, he added. Motion sensor flood, it'll scare them off. He said it like a coach telling me to follow through on a throw I'd messed up. The floodlight came from aisle 8, 2,000 lumens, too white, too bright. The kind of light that makes you visible in a new way. We mounted it over the front door and pretended we slept better. Leela didn't message me that night. She messaged Kayla instead. You're brave to live there. I never could. Too many trees. Too much dark. Tell Evan to close his blinds. He looks better without his mouth hanging open. I called Leela from the parking lot of a grocery store 2 towns over. Breath fogging in the air because I didn't want to see my words inside my house. Stop, I said. Stop what? She asked, almost kind. I haven't spoken to you in weeks. You messaged Kayla. No, she said. She messaged me. You're lying. Evan, she said, voice softening like she found something she'd dropped. You keep thinking the only person who remembers you is me. If this were a ghost story, that would be the place where lights in the store flicker and every head turns at once. Instead, a cart squeaked. A woman in a Purdue sweatshirt examined bananas and sighed like it meant something. The ordinary held. I started checking the public library computers after school. MS. Harkness, who had run the place since I was born, still stamped due dates in hardbacks as if the past were a system you could keep if you were stubborn enough. I asked about the Wi-Fi logs for the week the burner accounts began. She looked at me like I'd asked for a small sin and told me to bring a parent. I brought my mother, MS. Harkness printed a sheet like a receipt and slid it across the desk face down. 4 guest sessions used in a row the night the worst messages spread. All 1-hour blocks, all registered under the same handwritten name, Quinn Lane. It was an empty lot at the edge of town, a place where grain trucks cut their engines and pray the grade will forgive them. The library cameras were on the fritz that week. MS. Harkness said. The printed log smelled like toner and lemon cleaner. My mother folded it into her purse as if paper could speak in a voice that would finally be heard. The Buick came back. I memorized the blemishes. Rust bloom around the rear wheel well, duct tape on the passenger side mirror, the blue glass heart, of course, catching our floodlight and tossing it back in pieces. I wrote down the times. 11:18 p.m., 1:02 a.m., 3:11 a.m. My body learned to wake just before the last one. That's when Kayla's dad found the note under her wiper in the school lot. Red Sharpie again. The letters were neat like someone had practiced. I see the way he looks at you. You never looked at me like that." He took it to the office. The school called the sheriff. Deputy Malloy stood under the fluorescent hum and told us to avoid drama. Leela posted a sunset photo with the caption, "People write things they don't mean when they are tired." Everything crashed on a Wednesday night when Kayla called sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Someone had been knocking on her bedroom window, that same delicate tapping, a metronome for dread. Her father ran outside with a flashlight, but by then the yard was empty. The Buick idled half a block down, lights off, then slid away like a thought you can't hold. I dialed 911 from the driveway. A different deputy came this time. He wrote everything down as if the act of writing rearranged the atoms of danger. Kayla's parents blocked my number that night and asked the school to change Kayla's schedule. I didn't blame them. When a problem has a shape, people avoid everything that shares it. Then it stopped. No more DMs, no more burner accounts, no Buick, no keys wind chime, no tapping glass. The floodlight clicked on only for moths. Silence spread over us like a blanket someone else controlled. 2 weeks passed. Kayla and I circled each other the way people do when grief is alive and hasn't picked its final form. We didn't break up so much as unthread. I stood outside Nora's one morning and watched steam rise from the cup in my hands until it dissipated and I could pretend it meant something. Leela posted a photo of a church program. Engagement Sunday, a line of names I didn't recognize. A ring on a hand I still didn't recognize. The comment from her mother read, "Blessed." Someone tagged a man I'd never seen. They looked normal in a way that felt like erasure. I checked public records on a computer at the library no one else used. Leela's name came up on a lease in a town I'd only ever driven through for an away game. A week later, the lease changed hands. No forwarding address. If you want a clean ending, here it is. She moved on, we moved on, the town folded itself back into its routines. But a clean ending is just a story with parts cut off. Because months later, while helping my father replace the warped boards on our old back steps, I found a little tin box tucked into the support frame. It wasn't rusted enough to be old. Inside were 4 Polaroids and a key. In the first photo, 7th grade me stared at the camera mid-blink, caught ordinary. In the second, the camera faced our front porch, shot from across the street in the exact angle the Buick often idled. In the third, my bedroom window glowed faintly through blinds I hadn't closed all the way. In the fourth, a close-up of the blue glass heart out of focus, floodlight fracturing on its surface into 1,000 points of white. The key was cut in the shape of a house. The teeth had been filed down, useless, symbolic, or maybe once useful and then retired. At the bottom of the tin lay a scrap of paper torn from a spiral notebook. In red Sharpie, "You look better when you sleep." I didn't show my parents. I didn't show Deputy Malloy. I slid the note back into the tin, closed it, and put the tin back where I'd found it. I tell myself I did it because I didn't want to be the only person in town whose fear had evidence. The truth is simpler. Some proof is an invitation. I wasn't ready for who might accept. A year later, on a Saturday in June, I stopped at a farmer's market along Route 9. A woman at a craft booth sold pressed flower bookmarks and sun catchers. On her display, a single heart of blue glass hung by fishing line, the sunlight turning it into a smoldering planet. I stood there too long. "Those are popular," she said. "I have more in a box." I said, "No thanks." My voice came out wrong. She tilted her head the way people do when they recognize a song but not the words. I drove home by the long way. Every car that appeared in my mirror stayed just long enough for my body to react and then turned off as if on cue. At a four-way stop, a tan Buick rolled through without looking at me. The mirror was no longer taped. The rust had been painted over. The only familiar thing was the absence of the blue glass heart. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. It's possible to know you are seen without being sure by whom. Kayla and I sometimes send each other links now. Dog videos, a song we used to pretend we liked, a map to a national park we said we'd hike. We have new people in our lives, real and kind, people who won't love the part of us this story made hard to love. When we talk about that year at all, we speak in passive voice. Messages were sent. Accounts were made. A car was seen. The grammar is a way to make the world more neutral than it was. If you're listening because you've got your own version of a tan Buick in the night, here are the only useful things I learned. People will tell you to ignore it. You can't. People will tell you to prove it. Sometimes you won't be able to. People will tell you it's just online. It won't stay there. People will ask you whether she was mentally ill, whether you led her on, whether you're exaggerating. Those questions won't help you sleep. Locks and light and a handful of rare, stubborn friends will. The night before I left for college, I sat on the hood of my car in the driveway and waited to see if Layla, or whatever version of Leela had learned to speak in burner accounts and read Sharpie, would drive by to mark the end of the story in a way that made sense to her. Midnight came and nothing. 1, 2. At 3:11 a.m., my body woke like it had been trained by a whistle I couldn't hear. The floodlight didn't click on. The lilacs didn't stir. A train passed in the distance. Or maybe it was the sound memory makes when it rearranges itself to spare you. I went inside, sat at my desk, and wrote this down before the version that makes me feel brave could smother the version that's true. It should end here. Except sometimes. On nights, the radio static from the AM station drifts out past the grain elevators and lays down over our road like low fog. I get a friend request from a blank account with no posts. The name is always different, the profile picture always a circle the color of rain. I never accept. I never block. I let them sit there like a porch light I can choose not to turn on. Because this is the worst part, not knowing whether silence is mercy or planning. Story 5, The Sheriff's Land. When you move to a small town, you expect slow mornings, polite neighbors, maybe even a little peace. But what happens when the man sworn to protect that peace is the one you can't trust? This is the story of a backyard discovery in rural Missouri, a sheriff who smiled too much, and the night I realized some bones aren't meant to stay buried. After a messy divorce, I wanted quiet more than anything. I was 38, exhausted, and ready to start over. I found a modest 2-bedroom house just outside Benton Hollow, Missouri, a blink-and-miss-it town where the diner closed at 8 and the radio only worked if you faced east. The property wasn't much, but it came with 2 acres and a patch of woods out back. I figured I could fix it up slowly, paint the shutters, build a privacy fence, maybe even start a garden. For the first 2 weeks, everything felt exactly how I wanted. Birdsong instead of traffic, a sky so wide it made you dizzy, neighbors who waved from porches but didn't pry. And then on a Saturday morning, I started digging. I was setting posts for a fence along the back line when my auger hit something hard. At first, I thought it was a rock, but the soil was soft from recent rain. I knelt with a trowel and brushed until a pale curve appeared. It wasn't a root, it was bone. Long, smooth, unmistakably shaped. I've hunted enough to know deer femurs, raccoon skulls, possum remains. This wasn't that. And when I uncovered the upper half of what looked like a human skull, the world tilted sideways. I covered it quickly, heart pounding, and went inside to call the sheriff's office. That's when I met Sheriff Dalton. He arrived less than an hour later in a spotless black SUV. Middle-aged, barrel-chested, the kind of man who filled every doorway without trying. His uniform was so crisp it looked staged, like he ironed it before stepping out. I walked him to the spot. He glanced at the dirt, leaned down, brushed the soil once with his hand, and stood again. "Animal bones," he said flatly. "People used to bury livestock out here." I protested. "That's not an animal skull." He shrugged. "You'd be surprised what erosion does, trust me. I've seen it all." No evidence bag, no photographs. He didn't even take notes. When I asked if he'd at least send someone to test it, his eyes flicked toward mine with something too sharp to be casual. "Best thing you can do is cover it back up. Ground out here plays tricks. Don't go spooking yourself." Then he smiled, too long, too easy, and he left. The next morning, I noticed tire tracks in the wet clay along my back lot, fresh, heavy from a large vehicle. I hadn't been out there. That night, as I sat on the porch, a truck slowed in front of my property. It didn't stop, didn't honk, just idled a moment before rolling on. The next day, the soil where I dug was packed flat, smoother than I'd left it. I hadn't touched it. 3 days later, Dalton came back. Not in uniform this time, just jeans, flannel, and that same black SUV, still too clean for backroads. He held a cardboard tray with 2 coffees like we were old friends. "Thought I'd check in," he said. "How's the place treating you?" We sat at my kitchen table. He talked about fishing, whether the town's fall festival. Then, leaning forward, he asked casually, "You ever think about selling this place?" I laughed nervously. "I just moved in." He nodded slowly. Sure, but if you do, I'd make it easy. Cash, no paperwork hassle, keep it between us." His eyes didn't blink. When he left, I watched from the window. Mud caked his SUV tires that night. Every creak of the house sounded amplified. At 2 a.m., I swore I heard footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. By the time I got the courage to check, nothing was there. The next day, I came home from the grocery store to find my front door cracked open. No windows broken, nothing stolen except for my laptop. Just the laptop. I didn't call Dalton. I couldn't. The same red clay from my backyard. Instead, I reached out to an old college friend named Jason who worked in forensics up in Springfield. I told him enough to make him curious. He agreed to come down that weekend, bring some gear, check the soil sample himself. For the first time in days, I felt hope. But 2 nights before Jason arrived, I went out with a flashlight to the spot where I dug. The ground looked different, harder, tamped down, as if someone had filled it in more thoroughly. And on top of the soil, placed carefully like a warning, was a small white stone, perfectly round. I hadn't put it there. Jason arrived Saturday. He examined the soil, frowned, and said it looked disturbed recently. He took a small sample, promised to test it, but admitted he couldn't say much without more. 2 days later, he called. His voice was tight. "Evan, I can't put this in a report, but that was human bone dust. Fragments. Someone already ground it down before I tested." "How recent?" I asked. Silence, then recent enough. "I put my house up for sale the next month, quietly. No explanation, just wanted out." Dalton never came back in person, but I noticed his SUV more often, parked down the road, turning off just as I turned on, a shadow in the corner of my eye. The night before I moved, I walked the property one last time with a flashlight. At the back edge near the tree line, I found something half buried. A wooden stake with faded red paint. It looked like a marker. and on it, carved deep, 1979. I never confronted Dalton. I didn't have proof, just fragments, feelings, tire tracks, a missing laptop, a friend's whispered confirmation. I sold the house cheap to an older couple. They smiled like they'd found their dream retirement spot. I wanted to warn them. I didn't. I moved 2 states over, started again. But even now, years later, when I see a patrol car, my chest tightens. When I hear tires on gravel outside my window, I freeze. Because I know some land belongs to families, some to history, and some to sheriffs who protect more than the law. So what do you think? Did the sheriff cover up a family secret? Or did I just step into a piece of history no one was supposed to find? Story 6. The apartment upstairs. Imagine renting your first apartment alone. No roommates, no parents, just peace and freedom. Now imagine lying awake at 2 a.m. and realizing someone or something is moving directly above you in an apartment that's supposed to be empty. This is what happened to me my sophomore year of college, and it's the reason I never again lived alone. I was 19 when I signed the lease on Unit 2B at a faded fourplex on the edge of Maple Hollow, a Missouri town that still had payphones on Main Street. Rent was cheap, the walls thin, and my neighbors mostly older couples who kept to themselves. When I asked about the apartment above mine, the landlord waved a hand. "No one's been in 3B for a year," he said. "Last guy left in a hurry. Don't worry about it." That answer should have bothered me more than it did. But back then, all I cared about was independence. For the first few weeks, life was boring in the best way. Classes, shifts at the diner, late-night study sessions. Nights were quiet until they weren't. It started with soft pacing overhead, slow, deliberate, from one side of the ceiling to the other. At first, I thought it was pipes, maybe raccoons in the crawl space. But these weren't scurrying sounds. These were steps, weight shifting, pauses as if whoever it was stopped to listen. One night, around 2:15 a.m., I grabbed a broom handle and knocked on my ceiling like some sitcom neighbor. Silence for a while, then 3 slow steps in reply. The next morning, I confronted the landlord. He shook his head, smirking like I was gullible. "Still vacant, maybe you're stressed from exams." I wasn't. And by the next week, the noises grew louder, things dropping, dragging. Once, a sound like someone falling to their knees directly above my bed. Thud, thud, thud. That night, I barely slept. I decided to check for myself. The stairwell leading up to 3B was supposed to be locked. The door looked untouched when I moved in, but when I tried the knob one night, it hung loose. The wood around the lock was splintered like someone had kicked it in. I should have walked away. Instead, I pushed the door open. The stairwell reeked of mildew and dust. Scuff marks lined the walls as if hands or heavy objects had been dragged upward. At the top, the apartment door was cracked open. The air was stale, thick. No electricity, no furniture, just one object in the middle of the living room. A torn mattress, stained dark with something that had soaked deep into the fabric. Even with my flashlight, I didn't want to get closer. The smell was metallic. I backed out fast, heart hammering, and locked myself in my own apartment. That night at 3:11 a.m., the pacing started again, directly above the bloody mattress. After that, things shifted. Shadows flickered across my walls when no cars passed outside. My alarm clock reset itself twice, always to 3:11 a.m. I'd wake with the distinct feeling someone was watching me through the ceiling. One morning, after a weekend away, I returned to find 3 perfect dents in the ceiling above my bed. Small, circular, spaced like knees pressing down hard. I showed the landlord the broken lock, the dents, the photo I'd taken of the mattress. He smiled like I was performing. Door was reinforced months ago, he said. No way it broke and no one has a key. He suggested I get more sleep. That's when I realized I wasn't just alone in the building. I was alone with whatever history the landlord was hiding. For a week, the noises stopped. No pacing, no dragging, no thuds, but the silence wasn't comforting. It felt like something holding its breath. I started avoiding my apartment. I stayed late in the library, crashed on friends' couches. When I did return, the air inside 2B felt heavier, as though someone had been waiting. It was near the end of the semester when everything came to a head. I woke at 3:11 a.m. to the sound of something dragging. Not above me this time, inside my apartment. I froze. Every instinct screamed not to move. The noise shifted from the kitchen to the hall, slow and wet, like fabric soaked in water pulled across the floor. I gripped my phone, but the screen flickered, black, then lit, then black again. Finally, the dragging stopped at my bedroom door. A pause, silence so complete I could hear my pulse in my ears, and then 3 soft thuds on the other side of the door, like knees hitting the floor. I never opened it. I don't know how long I sat there until dawn. The next day, I packed everything and left. Broke my lease, lost my deposit, didn't care. A year later, I drove past the building out of morbid curiosity. New tenants lived there. Kids' toys littered the grass. The windows of 3B were shut tight. I thought about knocking, warning them, but I didn't, because I'm not sure what I would have said. Sometimes, though, I still wake at 3:11 a.m., certain I'll hear pacing above me even when I live on the top floor. So what do you think? Was it a squatter, a cover-up, or something older that never left that apartment? Tell me in the comments, and if you've ever lived somewhere with noisy neighbors in a supposedly empty unit, I'd love to hear your story. And remember, if you ever hear footsteps where no one's supposed to be, think twice before you go looking. Story 8, The Man in the Woods. If you've ever booked a remote, no neighbors cabin to clear your head, ask yourself one thing: who promised you'd be the only one there? This happened the fall I thought I needed silence. What I got was proof that silence has an owner. I'm Cal, 34 then, fresh off a year that chewed me up, layoffs at the fabrication shop, a breakup that felt like a slow leak. I wanted somewhere my phone couldn't find me. I found it on a classifieds board. 1-bedroom cabin, Granite Ridge, Montana, no cell, no Wi-Fi, cash discount if you stayed longer than a week. The owner, Ruth, was matter of fact on the phone. 2 miles up the county road, look for a cattle guard and a green gate with a bent hinge. Follow the creek on your right. If you hit the second switchback, you went too far. There's a landline if you have an emergency, real emergencies. Her laugh was dry as tinder. And lock the doors, not for people, for bears. I brought coffee, instant noodles, a paperback, a second-hand trail camera I'd meant to use for elk, and a new promise to myself: sleep, hike, heal. For 3 days it worked. Mornings were steam off the creek and the clean pop of split pine. Afternoons were the hush of lodgepole forest and a sky so blue it felt manufactured. I cooked simple: eggs, canned peaches, bread, and a quiet I hadn't felt in years settled into my bones. On the 4th night, something shifted. It rained, the kind that drills into dirt and turns the cabin roof into a drum. Around 2:19 a.m., a time I remember because the battery clock on the dresser ticked loud enough to be its own kind of companion, I heard a sound I couldn't file away as weather. Not wind, not a branch. Steps. Slow, careful. Crossing the porch boards just outside the door. One, then a pause, then another. The kind of walk you use when you want the boards not to answer you. I lay very still. The door's deadbolt, which I always set, felt thin as a button. Another step, two more. Silence. I didn't sleep after that. At dawn, I told myself it was a deer nosing the salt in the wood. When I opened the door, that story collapsed. Boot prints, human. Mud sucked from the creek bank, a defined heel and toe. Then a faint drag on the right foot, like a man who'd worn his soles uneven. They traced the porch edge, stopped at the doormat, turned and stepped off into the grass. I followed them 15 feet until the grass ate them, then looked back at my own door and felt like I was looking at a mouth. I made stronger coffee. I told myself to relax. That afternoon, I realized a jar of peanut butter was gone, and so were 2 slices of bread from the bag. I don't miscount food. I'd been measuring out mornings with it. The jar wasn't misplaced. It wasn't there. I told myself it had been a bear. Then I pictured a bear unscrewing a lid. The nearest town, Mineral Flat, was one main street and a feed store that sold everything from pellets to postcards. I went in for batteries and a bigger lock I didn't need. The clerk was a man whose name tag said Emmett, the kind who'd been old since he was 25. "You up at Granite?" he said, as if the dirt on my boots answered for me. "Cabin by the creek," I said. "Ruth's place." He nodded once like we'd crossed a border. "Lock your doors, not for bears." He looked at me to see if the joke landed. It didn't. "Some folks drift the section lines," he added. "Old habit from logging days. Sleep where they can, most just hungry." It sounded like permission wrapped in a warning. I bought the batteries and a set of small brass bells on a wire, the kind people hang over shop doors so sound moves before sight. Emmett rang them once, then held the wire out to me. "Hang it inside," he said. "Outside's for show." Back at the cabin, I noticed something I'd ignored. A spiral guest logbook on a shelf, duct-taped at the spine. Pages of people writing down sunsets, trout sizes, gratitude, sometimes recipes. Then 3 entries that didn't fit the porch-sitting tone. June 7, if you hear a whistle, it's not wind. June 13, even if it's hot, close the flu. July 1, he doesn't come if you leave the radio on. No names, just a ballpoint groove pressed hard enough to dent the page underneath. I closed the book and told myself I wouldn't open it again. That evening, I tied the bells to the inside of the front door. Their cheap shimmer looked ridiculous and instantly made me feel better. I mounted the trail camera on a Ponderosa facing the porch, low enough to catch faces, angled to the steps. I told myself I wanted video of a bear stealing peanut butter so I could laugh about it with friends later. I left the fire cold and the lights off and sat in the dark with my back to the wall, a habit I didn't know I had. At 2:19, the porch board spoke again. 1 step, 2. The bells didn't ring. The door breathed cold around the latch. I didn't move. Whoever was out there didn't either. We built a long, shared silence. Then 2 more steps, careful, and the softest touch to the doorknob, a metal whisper. I counted to 300 after the last sound. When I finally slept, I dreamed I was a door and someone was checking all my locks. The camera saved clips by motion. Morning light made the screen look like water as I scrolled. Clip 11, 2:17 a.m. The porch empty, rain still dripping. Clip 12, 2:19 a.m. A figure on the far right at the tree line just inside the cone of the porch light I'd left off, hood up. Shoulders angled away as if listening not to the cabin but to the night behind him. He stood there 4 minutes, didn't move, then stepped left and out of frame. No face. No brand logo, nothing sharp enough to file a report with. Just posture, the patience of someone who could wait longer than you. I watched it 4 times, feeling like I'd swallowed a battery. I set a second camera that afternoon on the other side of the clearing, tucked into alder, facing the back of the cabin where a person could approach without the porch boards telling on them. I laid a stick in a V on the ground as a marker to see if anyone brushed it. I slept in my clothes. At 2:21, I woke to the whisper of roof grit sliding under a foot. Between one heartbeat and the next, someone crossed from one side of the roof to the other. Slow, careful, deliberate. The bells didn't ring. The roof wasn't meant to warn me. I lay there feeling the old cabin give tiny, dusty answers to weight above me. A pause, then 3 compressions in the wood spaced like knees. I didn't breathe until the pressure lifted and the roof exhaled. Morning. The back camera caught him. Clip 29, 2:23 a.m. The hooded figure stepped out from behind the woodpile and paused in the open like a deer considers pasture. 16 feet from my bedroom window, then 12. He turned his head toward the glass, and in the IR light his hood flashed the flat gray of synthetic fabric. He held something I didn't want to identify, tool, stick, pry bar, angled down as if he'd forgotten it was in his hand. He never looked at the camera, which made me feel worse. People who don't scan for cameras aren't worried about cameras. I called Ruth on the landline. It rang so long I hung up and immediately felt childish for needing another human with a key. At noon, I found mud on the inside handle of the back door. A print so faint it could have been a smear, then clearer where a thumb found purchase to pull it shut. The second jar of peanut butter was gone. So was the bag of jerky. And on the kitchen table, the trail camera's box lay open the way I'd left it. But the spare SD card I'd kept inside had been placed on top of it, as if someone had gone through my things and wanted me to notice precisely one fact: I was not the only one recording. Emmett didn't pretend to laugh this time. He watched me as if inventorying which part of me wanted to bolt and which wanted to fight. He wiped the counter with a towel that started clean and ended up the color of old pennies. "You carrying?" he asked. "No, bear spray." "Yes." He nodded at that. "Sometimes there's a man up there. Lives along the ridge trail. I don't know where he sleeps. His boots are cheap. Drag on the right. You'll hear folks call him the looker." Emmett's mouth pulled into a miserable smile. "He looks. Doesn't take more than he needs. You leave and he leaves, mostly." "Mostly." Emmett let the towel dry his hands. "You know the old rule." At my face he added, "You don't know it, but you know it." He leaned in. "Don't announce you're scared. That makes a second plan." I bought 2 more cameras I didn't need and a battery radio. On the way out, Emmett called after me. "If you see a stack of 3 stones on your path, turn around." He might have been joking. He didn't laugh. That evening, I hiked a little farther up the ridge than I had before. The trail narrowed where the hillside slumped, then opened on a small bench with a view of the creek bending like a bent nail. In the middle of the trail, someone had stacked 3 stones, small, flat, and recent. They wobbled when I breathed near them. I turned around. Back at the cabin, I locked the doors, set the bells, and left the radio on low, a voice from Missoula fading in and out under static like a friend with a bad memory. At 2:19, the roof answered again. At 2:21, the bells gave a single bright ping as if a hand had brushed them to see how much voice they had. At 2:22, the radio cut out, then back, then out. At 2:23, the porch boards counted 3 steps and stopped at the window. The pressure of being looked at filled the room like a smell. The back camera later showed him closer than the night before, standing square to the glass, 10 feet maybe, the hood shadowing everything that could make him ordinary. He raised his free hand, palm open, and held it there as if requesting permission. Then he left. That morning I noticed something new. A thin pencil line on the inside wall, knee-height, right of the door, drawn hard enough to scar the paint. Above it, 5 small hash marks like someone counting days. I hadn't put them there. I would have seen them. I stared at that line long enough to feel stupid, then longer until I felt scared again. I erased it with my thumb. The graphite smeared. I packed. Not all of it. Some things you leave because you don't want to carry them past a place. I kept both SD cards in my pocket and carried my bag to the truck with my keys bristling out between my fingers in a way that wouldn't help me and wouldn't scare anyone who knew the difference. The road out was wetter than it should have been. Seep from the road cut, making the clay slick. At the green gate, I looked back once and saw nothing but a square of roof and the glare of noon on the creek. I told myself the right kind of leaving is a skill. I told myself I was using it. I didn't watch the final footage until 2 days later in a motel with curtains that smelled like lemon cleaner and a television bolted to the wall. It felt like a sacrament and a dare. The cameras held hours of forest, wind-moved limbs, finches flicking in and out of the frame. Then, clip 63 4:58 a.m. dawn flattening the trees to cut paper. The hooded man stood in the opening I used as a yard, closer now 8 feet from the lens. He looked at the camera not by accident but with intent, like someone finally acknowledging a second person in the room. His face was still in shadow. The tool in his right hand hung slack. With his left, he reached into his pocket, pulled something out, and lifted it up between 2 fingers. My spare SD card. He tapped the camera housing with it twice. Tock, tock. A sound so small and intimate it felt like a knock from inside a chest. Then he pivoted, walked to the edge of the clearing, and carefully set the card on top of a stacked 3-stone pile that hadn't been there the day before. He didn't look back. The clip ended as a jay landed on a branch and scolded the empty air. I called Ruth from the motel to tell her I'd left early and that my deposit didn't matter. "He back?" she asked, and I didn't ask who he was. "You lock up, radio on or off?" "On," I said. "Good," she said. "He doesn't come if the radio's talking, not much anyway." "Who is he?" I asked. "Don't know," she said, and it rang true the way apologies sometimes do. "Never seen him up close. He's kinder if you leave sooner than later." A pause. "He doesn't like winter, or maybe winter doesn't like him. Either way, he goes quiet." I told her about the rocks, the bells, the line on the wall. She told me to forget the line and take the bells. "Don't leave them," she said. "He'll play with them." "Should I tell the sheriff?" I asked and heard my city show. She said, "Sheriff will tell you folks passed through and he's not wrong. You didn't get hurt, you left, that's a win." Wins have a funny shape when you're the only one marking the score. I moved. New job, upstairs unit. Neighbors with kids who drop toys and apologize. I sleep more now than I did before, granted, but when 19 rides into a night like something with its own license, I still wake and listen, just in case a roof remembers feet. A month after I left Montana, a padded envelope arrived without a return address. Inside, my spare SD card and a single Polaroid. The photo was underexposed, taken from inside the cabin, the angle low, near the floor by the guest logbook shelf. In the foreground, my boots. Farther back, the edge of the bedroom door at night. On the door, 3 thin dents spaced like knees. On the back of the Polaroid, in block letters with a dull pencil, someone had written one word: sooner. I didn't call Ruth. I didn't call anyone. I slid the card into a kitchen drawer under a roll of tape and a handful of rubber bands and left it there like an idea I didn't want to pick up. People will tell you to bring a gun. Maybe that helps. People will tell you a bigger lock is a bigger safety. It's not by itself. What helped me were small, dumb things. Bells inside, not outside. Let your warnings be for you, not for the person you're warning. A radio talking low. It made the night less appetizing. Don't perform your fear. Pack during daylight. Leave like you meant to. Trail cameras you don't brag about. Record for yourself. Not for a fight you can't finish. Notice the stacks of stones. Turn around when someone else writes the map for you. If you need a story that ends with an arrest or a face in a mugshot, this isn't it. If you need a ghost, I can't sell you one. All I have is a hood, a posture, a schedule kept better than mine, and a cabin where the line on the wall is either a calendar or a warning, and either way it worked. Because I left. And because when you rent silence, you should remember who actually owns it. Story 8, The Phantom Truck. Backroads at night are supposed to be empty. Just you, the trees, and your headlights carving tunnels through the dark. But sometimes something follows you. Sometimes it's not a person, not a car you can wave past. Sometimes what's behind you shouldn't be possible at all. This is the story of the night I learned what it means when locals warn. Don't drive Hickory Hollow Road after midnight. I just moved back to Millstone, Arkansas, a town so small its radio station still cut to farm reports at noon. My father had suffered a mild stroke, and I'd left my apartment in Little Rock to help him out. Most nights I stayed home, but that Friday a friend invited me to a birthday gathering 30 miles out. I stayed later than I meant to. By the time I left, it was 10:50 p.m., and I didn't want to take the main highway, construction, lane closures, 20 extra minutes, so I turned onto Hickory Hollow Road. The road was older, narrower, two faded lanes threading between forests and pastures. No lights, no service, the kind of road you know better than to break down on. I'd driven it a dozen times in high school back when speed limits were just suggestions. I thought I knew it. At first, it was just my car, the night, and the hum of tires on asphalt. Then in the rearview mirror, a pair of headlights appeared. At first distant, then closing, too fast. It was a boxy silhouette, an old pickup truck, 1980s maybe, the kind with square headlights that rattled when they hit potholes. It tailgated so close I could see the grill bouncing in my mirror. Then the high beams flashed, once, twice, 3 times in steady bursts. I tapped my brakes, the universal back-off signal. The pickup didn't. It flashed again. There was no shoulder to pull off on, just drainage ditches and black pines leaning in. The truck stayed pinned to my bumper, brights pouring into my car like a second sun. Every curve, every straightaway it followed. Minutes stretched, 10, 15. Every time I thought the truck might back off, it surged closer, bright stabbing into my rear window so hard I had to squint. I couldn't see the driver, not once. Just glare and the faint impression of something tall behind the wheel. I pushed 5 over the limit, then 10. The truck matched me. At one point on a longer straight, I slowed nearly to a crawl, hoping it would pass. It didn't. It just idled behind me, revving once, then settling back into that steady stalk. It wasn't drunk driving. It wasn't impatience. It was deliberate. When the road finally widened near an old gravel turnoff, I braked, pulled to the side, and gestured angrily for it to go around. The truck slowed, headlights flooding my car, then rolled to a stop 10 feet behind me, still flashing. That was the moment the crawling fear in my spine turned to full panic. I hit the gas and tore back onto the road. After nearly 20 minutes of this, my hands were slick on the wheel. My chest hurt from how hard I was gripping air. Then, salvation. Up ahead, a gas station I vaguely remembered, its lights glowing faint green in the dark like a lighthouse. I swung into the lot, my car crunching gravel. I pulled up under the awning by the pumps. I looked in the rear view. The road behind me was empty. No headlights, no truck. For the first time in half an hour, I breathed. I told myself the driver had peeled off down one of the side roads I hadn't noticed. Maybe they'd been messing with me. Maybe it was over. But then I noticed something worse. Fresh tire tracks. They curved into the far edge of the lot, wet grooves pressed deep like something heavy had pulled in, idle, then backed out. And they were still glistening damp under the station lights. The gas station itself was closed. 11 p.m. Sharp, said the sign on the door, but a single clerk sat behind the glass doing paperwork. I knocked, still shaking, and he opened the door a crack. "You okay, buddy?" I told him what happened, the truck, the lights, the pursuit. He frowned, then said, "You're the third this month." My stomach dropped. He led me to the back office where the monitor for the station's security cameras flickered black and white. He rewound to 11:07 p.m. The minute I'd pulled in, there was my car, headlights sweeping across the lot. Empty road behind me. I leaned in. Wait, no, it was right on me, flashing non-stop. The clerk shook his head. "Watch closer." He rewound again. At 11:02 p.m., 5 minutes before I arrived, the old pickup appeared. Same shape, same jittery headlamp. It rolled into the lot, idled at the far edge for a minute, then backed out and disappeared down the highway. The timestamp was clear. The footage was clean. According to that camera, the truck had left before I got there. So what the hell had followed me? The clerk, his name was Marcus, didn't look surprised. "You came up Hickory Hollow, didn't you?" I nodded. He sighed. "That road's bad luck, always has been, wrecks, vanishings. My uncle swore up and down he saw a truck tail him there back in '94. Same story, Brights, too close, then gone." "Maybe someone copied the story," I said weakly. Marcus shook his head. "Thing is, half the people who see it, footage says the truck was already here before they ever pulled in." I didn't drive Hickory Hollow again, not once. I stuck to the main highway, construction or not, but that didn't stop the echoes. Twice, parked in my dad's driveway, I saw a pair of headlights slow across the far ridge and blink 3 times before vanishing. Once, on my way home from work, my radio cut out to static and a voice, deep, flat, murmured a single word, "faster." I couldn't prove it was connected, but I knew. The last straw came 2 weeks later. I was cleaning out the back seat when I noticed something on the inside of my rear window. 3 long smears, vertical, parallel, like fingers dragged down glass from the wrong side. So what was the phantom truck? A prank? A ghost of old Rex? Or something worse? Something that doesn't follow roads, just people? Tell me in the comments. If you saw a pair of high beams in your rear view, would you stop, speed up, or pray the gas station lights come soon enough? And if you ever find yourself on Hickory Hollow Road after midnight, keep your eyes forward. Whatever's behind you might not be bound by time.